3 Apache women save a wounded cowboy, and now he's their husband by sacred mandate. The sun was sinking slowly behind the jagged peaks of the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. A lone cowboy rode his horse along a narrow trail, exhaustion written on his face. His clothes were torn, and his hat was slouched low, shielding his tired eyes from the harsh light. He had been traveling for days, trying to escape a band of ruthless outlaws who had attacked him near a small settlement. The horse stumbled on a loose rock, and the cowboy nearly fell. He pushed himself upright, feeling every ache in his body. His injuries were serious, cuts on his arms, a twisted ankle, and a deep gash on his side that made it hard to breathe. Despite the pain, he kept moving. He knew that staying in one place would be dangerous. The desert was vast, and he was alone. He looked around, searching for a place to rest, a place to hide. But all he could see were endless rocks, sparse shrubs, and the occasional coyote prowling in the distance. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the ground, making the desert look even more empty and unforgiving. His horse grew weaker, limping with each step. The cowboy's hands shook as he held the reins, sweat mixing with the dust on his face. Suddenly, he stumbled and fell to the ground. Pain shot through his side, and he struggled to catch his breath. He tried to stand, but his strength was fading. The thought of giving up crossed his mind, but something deep inside refused to let him. He crawled forward, dragging himself over the rocks, feeling the rough earth scrape his hands and knees. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. He was aware of every sound, the wind whistling through the canyons, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of dry leaves. It all seemed louder in his desperate silence. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped rapidly. The desert, which had been scorching during the day, now felt cold and unforgiving. The cowboy shivered, his body weak from blood loss and exhaustion. He knew he could not survive the night out here alone. Every instinct screamed that he needed help, but in this vast wilderness, help seemed impossible. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining a warm fire, water, and safety. But when he opened them, there was only darkness and rocks. Just as he was about to lose hope, he heard faint footsteps in the distance. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a trick of the wind. But the sound grew closer, careful and deliberate. He tried to call out, but his voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Help, please," he muttered, hoping someone could hear him. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, silence returned, and the desert seemed even more vast and lonely. Then soft voices spoke, not harsh or threatening, but gentle and melodic. 3 women appeared from behind a cluster of rocks, moving with grace and confidence. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen. Their clothes were simple but well-made, decorated with patterns that seemed to tell stories of their people. Their eyes were alert, scanning him carefully. One of them stepped forward, holding a small bundle in her arms. She looked at him with a mixture of caution and concern. "He is badly hurt," she said to the others in a language he did not understand, but the tone of her voice was clear. It was a voice that carried kindness. The cowboy tried to speak, but the pain in his chest made it difficult. The women approached slowly, offering support. One of them kneeled beside him, examining his wounds with practiced hands. She cleaned the cuts with water from a small container and wrapped them with strips of cloth. Another woman brought a blanket, carefully covering him to keep him warm. The third stood watch, her eyes scanning the horizon, alert to any danger. The cowboy felt a mix of fear and relief. He did not know these women, yet here they were, risking their safety to help him. They lifted him gently, guiding him through the narrow canyon trails. He could barely move, but their strength and care kept him steady. The journey was slow, each step measured and deliberate. They spoke to him softly, though he did not understand the words. The tone conveyed reassurance. They seemed determined, fearless, and wise. The desert around them was quiet, the night full of shadows and whispers of wind, but the women's presence made it feel safe. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small hidden settlement nestled in a canyon. It was a place of warmth and light, with fires burning and the scent of food in the air. The cowboy was carefully laid on a soft bed, surrounded by cushions and blankets. The women worked quickly to tend his wounds, preparing poultices and herbal remedies. One woman whispered something to him, and though he could not understand, he sensed her intent was comforting. He closed his eyes, feeling the first sense of safety he had experienced in days. As the night deepened, the cowboy drifted in and out of consciousness. He saw glimpses of the women moving around him, their faces calm and focused. He heard their laughter at times, light and musical, and felt the gentle touch of their hands as they cared for him. In his dreams, he saw flashes of the desert and the dangers he had faced, but they were softened by the warmth and protection of these women. He realized that, in all his travels, he had never encountered such courage and compassion. By morning, the sun's rays filtered through the canyon, casting a golden light over the small village. The cowboy awoke to the smell of herbs and the sound of birds singing. His wounds had been cleaned and dressed, and he felt slightly stronger. The women were already awake, preparing breakfast and checking on him. One of them offered him food, and though his hands trembled, he managed to eat. The taste of the simple meal, combined with the comfort of the women's presence, filled him with a sense of gratitude he could not put into words. Over the next few days, the cowboy began to regain his strength. The women taught him how to move carefully, how to avoid straining his injuries, and how to survive in the harsh environment of the desert. He listened to their stories, learning about the land, the animals, and the traditions of their people. Though he could not understand all the words, he felt the meaning behind them, the respect for nature, the value of courage, and the importance of community. Slowly, he realized that his life had changed forever. What began as a chance encounter in the desert had turned into something extraordinary. These women, with their wisdom, strength, and kindness, had saved him from certain death. And in doing so, they had opened a door to a world he had never known, a world of courage, tradition, and unexpected connection. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he owed his life to these remarkable women. The cowboy's journey had begun in desperation and fear, but it was now filled with hope. He understood that survival was not just about enduring hardships alone, but about trusting others and allowing oneself to be cared for. As he lay in the small settlement, surrounded by the women who had saved him, he felt a quiet determination grow inside him. He would live, he would recover, and he would honor the courage and compassion that had been shown to him in his darkest hour. The cowboy's body was slowly regaining strength, but it was his spirit that needed healing the most. The Apache women worked tirelessly to care for him, not just physically but in every way they could. Each day, they moved with grace and patience, tending to his wounds, preparing food, and guiding him gently through the small, hidden settlement. Though he could now walk short distances, the cowboy remained cautious, relying on their support to avoid straining his injuries. The mornings were filled with a quiet routine. The women would rise before dawn, moving through the soft light of the canyon with a fluidity that seemed almost magical. One would gather fresh herbs from the nearby cliffs, their leaves and flowers rich with healing properties, while another prepared a simple breakfast of corn, wild fruits, and warm water. The third woman kept watch, scanning the canyon's edges for any sign of danger. Their movements were synchronized, almost like a dance, and the cowboy watched them in awe. He had never seen people move with such purpose and harmony. Slowly, he began to speak more, practicing the few words he could remember from the Apache language the women used. Though he struggled at first, the women were patient, correcting him gently with smiles and nods. Communication became a bridge between them, a way to share stories and laughter even without perfect words. One afternoon, As they rested in the shade of a large rock, the cowboy tried to describe the world he had come from: dusty towns, crowded saloons, and wide-open prairies. The women listened intently, their eyes reflecting curiosity and understanding. Then they would respond with tales of the canyon, the animals that roamed it, and the spirits that guided their people. Days turned into weeks, and the cowboy's injuries slowly healed. But even more importantly, a bond began to grow between him and the women. He noticed the gentle way one of them would smooth his hair back from his forehead when he fell asleep, and the quiet strength of another as she carried water from a distant spring. The third woman had a way of making him laugh even when he felt weak and discouraged. He realized that each of them had become essential to his survival, not only through their care but through their companionship. One afternoon, the women took him to a nearby stream. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones and reflecting the sunlight in tiny sparks. They guided him to sit beside the water, showing him how to wash his wounds carefully and apply fresh herbs to speed healing. As he worked, one of the women handed him a small, carved bowl filled with crushed leaves and flowers. "This will help," she said in a voice gentle but firm, and he felt a warmth spread through him, not just from the remedy but from her care. It was during these moments of quiet teaching that the cowboy began to understand the depth of their knowledge. These women were not just healers, they were guardians of their land, keepers of ancient wisdom passed down through generations. He listened as they explained, in gestures and simple words, the importance of balance in life, respect for nature, and the strength that comes from community. He realized that their way of living was both practical and deeply spiritual, and he felt a profound respect for them that grew each day. Evenings were filled with stories around the fire. The cowboy would sit wrapped in a blanket, watching the flickering flames dance across the canyon walls. One woman would sing a soft, haunting melody while the others shared tales of their ancestors, their words painting pictures of bravery, adventure, and love. Sometimes the cowboy would speak of his own experiences, riding through deserts, facing storms, and surviving dangerous encounters. Though he spoke cautiously, afraid of seeming boastful, the women listened with genuine interest, nodding and laughing at the moments that brought joy. During one quiet night, the cowboy noticed something that made his heart swell with gratitude. One of the women had stayed awake, sitting by his side, keeping vigil as he slept. Her eyes were calm but watchful, and the soft rhythm of her breathing seemed to reassure him in ways he could not explain. In that moment, he understood something crucial. The bond they shared was not simply about healing the body, but about healing the soul. Each act of care, each smile, each story told by the fire was a thread weaving them together in trust, respect, and unspoken affection. As the days passed, the cowboy began to contribute in small ways. He helped gather firewood, fetched water, and learned the techniques for preparing food and tending to the animals in the village. Though his movements were sometimes clumsy, the women guided him with patience, showing him that effort, even imperfect, was valued. The cowboy felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. He was no longer a lone wanderer struggling to survive. He was part of a community, and that realization filled him with a quiet joy. One afternoon, a small challenge tested their growing bond. While gathering herbs near a rocky outcrop, the cowboy slipped and nearly fell into a narrow ravine. Before he could react, one of the women reached out and caught him, steadying his weight with surprising strength. Her eyes were steady and serious as she guided him back to safe ground. The cowboy felt a mix of embarrassment and gratitude, realizing that even small mistakes could have consequences. But he also understood something deeper. These women were not just caretakers. They were partners in survival, capable, courageous, and fiercely protective. In the evenings, as the sun set and the canyon glowed with shades of gold and purple, the cowboy began to reflect on his journey. He remembered the fear, pain, and despair that had accompanied him when he first stumbled into the canyon. But now those feelings were tempered with gratitude, admiration, and a quiet sense of belonging. He watched the women as they moved gracefully around the fire, preparing food or mending clothes, and he realized that their strength was not only physical but emotional and spiritual. They had taught him lessons about patience, courage, and the importance of connection, lessons that he had never fully understood before. One evening, as the stars blanketed the sky, the women gathered near him and handed him a small bundle of herbs. One of them spoke softly, motioning for him to inhale their scent. As he did, a sense of peace washed over him. It was as if the harshness of the desert, the pain of his injuries, and the fear of the past days were melting away. The women's actions, their words, and their very presence had created a safe space for him, a place where healing was more than physical, where trust and respect formed the foundation for something greater. As he drifted into sleep that night, the cowboy realized that he had begun to love this place and the people in it, not in the way of a fleeting infatuation, but in a deep, abiding respect and admiration. He felt gratitude for the hands that had healed him, for the voices that had comforted him, and for the courage that had guided him through the darkest hours. He understood that their lives were not separate from his own now. They were intertwined, connected through trust, compassion, and shared experience. By the end of the second week, the cowboy's body was strong enough for longer walks, and he began to explore the settlement more confidently. The women taught him the ways of the land, how to track animals, gather food, and respect the delicate balance of nature. He learned to move silently through the canyon, noticing the subtle signs of wildlife and weather. Each lesson deepened his appreciation for their wisdom, and he felt himself becoming part of the rhythm of their lives. The bond between them grew stronger, rooted not only in survival but in admiration, trust, and shared moments of laughter and quiet reflection. One morning, as the sun rose behind the cliffs, the cowboy realized something he had not expected. These women who had saved his life had become his teachers, his companions, and his family. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just for his own life, but for theirs as well. Their courage, kindness, and wisdom had given him a second chance, and he vowed silently to honor that gift. He understood that his journey was no longer only about survival, but about learning, growing, and giving back in return for the care he had received. The days continued, filled with small victories and quiet joys. The cowboy laughed more freely, moved more confidently, and felt a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. The women, in turn, seemed to appreciate his efforts, his humility, and the way he listened and learned. Together, they formed a bond that was more than friendship. It was a connection of respect, care, and slowly growing affection. The cowboy knew that his life had changed forever, and for the first time in years, he felt hope not just for survival, but for a future he had never imagined possible. As the days turned into weeks, the cowboy felt stronger in both body and spirit. He had learned how to move through the canyon quietly, how to gather food, and how to respect the land that now seemed like a living companion. Yet, despite the comfort and connection he had found with the three Apache women, he could sense that there was something deeper waiting for him, a truth that he had not yet fully understood. One morning, the village elder called him to sit by the fire. The elder was a tall, wise figure with eyes that seemed to see everything, as if nothing could be hidden from them. His voice was calm but carried authority, each word measured with care. "You have been healed," he said, "and you have learned the ways of our people. But your journey is not yet complete. There is a sacred path that must be honored." The cowboy listened, unsure of what to expect. The women who had cared for him were nearby, their faces calm but attentive. The elder continued, explaining the ancient tradition of their people. When someone is saved from death by the hands of the community, they are considered bound to that community. The bond is not merely symbolic, it is spiritual and practical. Those who save life bear responsibility, and those who are saved are expected to honor that care by joining fully in the community's life. The cowboy's heart raced. He had never imagined such a responsibility. He had been a wanderer, surviving on his own, moving from town to town without any ties beyond necessity. The idea that he might be spiritually bound to this small village, and to the 3 women who had saved him, was overwhelming. Yet he could see in the elder's eyes that this was not a threat, but a gift, a chance to live fully, to be part of something larger than himself. The 3 women approached him slowly. One knelt beside him and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of reassurance and connection. Another touched his shoulder lightly, as if to convey support, while the third stood silently, her gaze steady and thoughtful. They did not speak, but their presence spoke volumes. It was clear that this was not simply a tradition to be followed mechanically. It was a sacred bond, an honor, and a responsibility that would define the rest of his life. The elder explained that accepting the sacred mandate was not about losing freedom, but about embracing a new life with purpose and meaning. He would live among them, share their daily tasks, and respect their customs. More importantly, he would form a special bond with the 3 women who had saved him, a bond that was both spiritual and emotional, guided by respect, care, and shared responsibility. At first, the cowboy was uncertain. He had never thought of himself as capable of such commitment. The life he had known was one of solitude, danger, and independence. He feared that he would fail, that he would not live up to the expectations placed upon him. Yet as he looked at the women, he realized that they were not demanding obedience. They were offering trust, guidance, and partnership. Their faith in him was stronger than any fear he had ever felt. The following days were a period of preparation and reflection. The women taught him more about their sacred practices, showing him how to honor the spirits of the land, how to contribute to the village, and how to balance the responsibilities of daily life with the deeper spiritual meaning of the mandate. Each lesson was filled with patience and care. They encouraged him to ask questions, to express doubt, and to engage fully with the process. The cowboy began to understand that this bond was not a chain, but a framework for living with purpose, honor, and love. One morning, the women took him to a high cliff overlooking the canyon. The wind swept over them, carrying the scent of sage and earth. From this vantage point, he could see the village below, the river winding through the rocks, and the vast desert stretching beyond. It was a breathtaking sight, and he felt a sense of humility and awe. The women spoke to him softly, explaining the significance of the place. It was a sacred site where the community honored both life and death, where decisions were made with care, and where bonds of trust were strengthened. The cowboy knelt beside them, feeling a mixture of reverence and nervousness. He realized that he was about to commit to something far greater than himself, something that would require courage, patience, and faith. The women joined hands around him, forming a circle of support and connection. Their eyes met his, conveying warmth, strength, and unspoken encouragement. It was a moment of clarity. He was no longer alone. The bond he had feared was now a source of strength, guiding him toward a new life that promised both challenge and fulfillment. Over the next few weeks, the cowboy fully immersed himself in the village's life. He helped with daily chores, learning to cook traditional meals, gather firewood, and care for the small garden that sustained them. He accompanied the women on tasks that required skill and courage, such as tracking animals, navigating the rugged terrain, and helping to build simple structures to protect the village from the elements. Each day was filled with lessons, challenges, and small victories. Through these shared experiences, he grew closer to the women. Their personalities became more familiar, their strengths and quirks endearing. One woman had a sharp sense of humor that could make him laugh even in difficult moments. Another possessed quiet wisdom, offering guidance in subtle ways that revealed the depth of her understanding. The third was fiercely brave, willing to take risks for the sake of the community, inspiring him to push beyond his own limits. Together, they formed a bond that was practical, emotional, and deeply spiritual. The cowboy also began to understand the sacred dimension of the mandate. It was not simply about surviving with the women. It was about learning to live in harmony with them, with the community, and with the land itself. The elders spoke of balance, teaching him that every action had consequences, and every decision required thought and care. Through these teachings, he began to see the world differently. Danger was not just physical, it was also emotional, ethical, and spiritual. Trust, respect, and courage were as vital as skill with a horse or knife. One afternoon, while sitting by the river, the cowboy reflected on his journey. He remembered the fear, pain, and solitude he had felt in the desert, and compared it to the warmth, safety, and connection he now experienced. The women had saved his life, yes, but they had also shown him a path to something greater, a life of meaning, purpose, and belonging. He realized that the sacred mandate was not a burden, but a gift, offering him a chance to grow, learn, and love in ways he had never imagined. As he looked at the women, he felt a surge of gratitude and admiration. They had trusted him with their traditions, guided him through his fears, and shared their lives with him without hesitation. In turn, he had begun to trust himself, to find courage he had never known, and to feel a sense of responsibility and devotion that transcended mere survival. The bond that had once seemed daunting was now a source of strength, a foundation on which he could build a new life. The elder gathered him again, this time to speak of the deeper responsibilities of the sacred mandate. He explained that the bond was not only about the present but also about the future. The cowboy would be expected to honor the village's traditions, to care for the women who had saved him, and to participate fully in the community's life. This was not a simple obligation, it was a spiritual covenant, one that required honesty, courage, and integrity. The cowboy listened carefully, understanding that this was a moment of transformation. That night, as the stars spread across the sky, the cowboy lay awake thinking about the path ahead. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, understanding that life would not be easy, but that it would be meaningful. The women slept nearby, their presence comforting even in the quiet darkness. He realized that he had begun to love them, not just as friends or caretakers, but as companions whose courage, wisdom, and kindness had forever changed his life. In the weeks that followed, the cowboy fully embraced the sacred mandate. He learned the ceremonies, the rituals, and the ways in which the community honored life and death. He participated in dances, in songs, and in shared storytelling, understanding that each action was a thread in a larger tapestry of connection. Through these experiences, his bond with the women deepened further. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was part of a community, part of a living, breathing tradition that honored courage, compassion, and trust. The sacred mandate, once mysterious and intimidating, became a guiding force in his life. It shaped his decisions, strengthened his character, and nurtured a love that was both spiritual and emotional. He had learned that life was not merely about surviving, but about connecting deeply with others, honoring those who had saved him, and contributing meaningfully to the world around him. Through the women's guidance, he had discovered a path of courage, respect, and profound gratitude. By the end of this chapter of his journey, the cowboy understood that his life had been forever transformed. The desert, which had once been a place of fear and isolation, had led him to a hidden community filled with wisdom, love, and purpose. The women who had saved him were now inseparable parts of his life, guiding him, teaching him, and loving him in ways he had never imagined possible. He realized that the sacred mandate was not a chain but a blessing, a bridge to a life filled with meaning, connection, and enduring loyalty. life in the hidden canyon village was not always easy. Though the cowboy had embraced the sacred mandate and grown close to the 3 Apache women, he soon realized that being part of this community required more than gratitude and willingness. It demanded courage, patience, and resilience in the face of challenges that were often unexpected. Every day brought a test, not only of physical skill, but of emotional strength and the ability to adapt. One morning, the cowboy awoke to the distant sound of a commotion. Smoke was rising on the horizon, curling above the rocks in a thin, gray line. His heart pounded as he quickly dressed and followed the women, who moved with practiced speed and calm determination. The village had been threatened by a small group of outsiders, travelers who had stumbled upon the settlement by chance and did not yet understand the sacredness of the place. Though they were not dangerous, they had unsettled the animals and frightened some of the younger villagers. The women guided him carefully, instructing him on how to handle the situation without causing panic or harm. The cowboy watched closely, absorbing every gesture, every word, and the way the women negotiated calmly and firmly. It was a lesson in leadership, patience, and courage. He realized that strength was not always about fighting or physical prowess. Sometimes it was about calm, deliberate action and understanding the needs of others. That day he helped calm the visitors, learned to communicate with a firm but gentle voice, and discovered a new confidence in himself. But life was not only about external challenges. Internally, the cowboy faced struggles he could not have anticipated. Though he had embraced the sacred mandate, he sometimes felt moments of doubt. The traditions and customs were foreign to him, and he feared making mistakes that might dishonor the women or the village. There were times when he missed the life he had known, freedom, independence, and the simplicity of moving from one town to another without the weight of responsibility. Yet each time doubt crept in, he would look at the women, and their trust, patience, and guidance reminded him of why he had come here. Daily tasks also proved challenging. The canyon was rugged and the work demanding. The cowboy learned to carry heavy bundles of firewood up steep paths, fetch water from the distant spring, and gather herbs and plants for medicine. Each task tested his endurance, but he found that the women's encouragement made it bearable. They taught him not only the skills but the mindset, how to approach work with patience, care, and mindfulness. The cowboy began to understand that life in the village was not merely about survival, but about participating fully, with intention and respect. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high in the sky, a small accident occurred. While helping the women repair a damaged section of the village's fence, the cowboy lost his footing and tumbled down a shallow slope. Though he was not seriously hurt, he felt the weight of failure pressing on him. The women rushed to his side, checking him carefully and ensuring he was unharmed. Their concern was genuine, but it was accompanied by encouragement, not scolding. "We all stumble," one of them said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What matters is that you rise again." This incident, though minor, became a turning point. The cowboy realized that growth was not only about success, but also about resilience, the ability to recover, to learn from mistakes, and to continue with courage. He began to approach every task with renewed determination, understanding that his efforts mattered not only for himself, but for the women and the village that had saved his life. Each challenge became an opportunity to prove his commitment, and with each small success, his confidence grew. Evenings in the village were a time for reflection and connection. The cowboy often sat by the fire with the women, sharing stories, laughing, and learning more about their lives. They taught him songs, showed him the patterns in their weaving, and explained the meaning behind each symbol and gesture. Through these moments, the bond between them deepened. He saw not only their strength and wisdom, but also their kindness, humor, and unwavering dedication. It became clear that this was not just a community in which he had survived, but a family in which he belonged. As the days passed, more serious challenges arrived. A sudden storm swept through the canyon one night, bringing heavy rain and fierce winds. The river that ran beside the village swelled quickly, threatening to flood the lower areas. The cowboy and the women worked tirelessly, securing shelters, moving animals to higher ground and reinforcing barriers. The storm raged through the night, testing their strength and endurance. Though exhausted, they supported each other, sharing the burden and relying on the skills they had developed together. By morning, the village was safe, but the cowboy felt a deep sense of accomplishment and connection. He had faced danger alongside the women, proving not only his loyalty, but also his courage. During quieter moments, the cowboy also learned lessons of patience and understanding. The women often engaged in rituals and ceremonies that seemed unfamiliar at first, but gradually, he came to appreciate their significance. He watched as they honored the spirits of the land, the ancestors, and the bonds that held their community together. Through participation and observation, he began to see life through their eyes, a world where every action carried meaning, and where love, respect, and courage were intertwined. The sacred mandate was not just a duty, it was a path toward growth, understanding, and harmony. The cowboy's relationship with the three women evolved in subtle but profound ways. He came to understand their strengths and vulnerabilities, their fears and joys. One woman's laughter could brighten the darkest day, another's wisdom could calm his restless thoughts, and the third's bravery inspired him to confront challenges he might have avoided. Together, they faced trials, celebrated successes, and built a bond that was practical, emotional, and deeply spiritual. He began to see them not only as teachers or caretakers, but as equals, companions, and partners in the journey of life. As weeks turned into months, the cowboy's transformation became evident. He moved with confidence, contributed meaningfully to the village, and embraced the sacred mandate with pride. He learned that leadership was not about command, but about service, understanding, and support. Each day brought new lessons in patience, humility, and courage. The challenges, once daunting, became opportunities to grow, to learn, and to deepen his connection with the women and the community that had welcomed him. The women also saw his growth and acknowledged it in subtle ways. A nod of approval, a smile, or a shared task became moments of quiet recognition. The bond between them was no longer simply about gratitude or duty. It had evolved into mutual respect, trust, and affection. The cowboy understood that love in this context was not rushed or forced. It was a steady, growing connection, built on shared experience, courage, and commitment. One evening, after a long day of work, the cowboy sat by the fire reflecting on all that had happened. He thought of the desert, the bandits, the injuries, and the fear he had faced alone. And then he thought of the women, the village, and the lessons he had learned. He realized that the trials he had endured were not just obstacles but opportunities to grow stronger, to connect more deeply, and to embrace a life richer than he had ever imagined. The storm, the accidents, and the daily challenges had shaped him into someone new. He was no longer the lone wanderer who had stumbled into the canyon, vulnerable and uncertain. He was a part of something larger, a community that valued courage, wisdom, and compassion. He was bound to the women not only by the sacred mandate but by respect, loyalty, and slowly, love. And in that realization he found peace. By the end of this chapter of his life, the cowboy understood the meaning of true partnership. Life was not without hardship, but it was shared hardship that gave meaning to survival. He had learned that courage was not only physical but emotional and spiritual. He had discovered that love was not merely a feeling but a commitment to care, protect, and grow together. And most importantly, he had realized that the sacred mandate was not a burden, but a blessing, an opportunity to live fully, with purpose, and in harmony with the women who had saved him. In the quiet moments, he often watched the women, noting their patience, wisdom, and quiet strength. He understood that their lives were full of responsibility and challenges, yet they faced each day with grace and courage. He felt a deep desire to support them, to honor them, and to share in the burdens and joys of their lives. And as he looked at the stars above the canyon, he felt gratitude, not only for survival but for the chance to belong, to learn, and to love in ways he had never imagined possible. Time passed, and the cowboy's life in the hidden canyon village became more than he had ever imagined. He had grown strong, skilled, and confident. The sacred mandate, which once seemed like a weighty responsibility, had become a guiding force in his life. He now understood the depth of the bond between himself and the three Apache women, a connection that was spiritual, emotional, and practical. Each day, their lives were intertwined in ways that brought meaning, joy, and a sense of belonging he had never known. The morning sun rose over the canyon, casting long shadows across the village. The cowboy awoke to the soft sounds of birds and the gentle murmur of the river below. The three women were already busy, moving gracefully through their morning routines. One gathered fresh herbs while another prepared a simple breakfast, and the third checked the animals to ensure they were safe. The cowboy joined them, fetching water, helping with food, and attending to small tasks. It was a life of purpose and rhythm, a life where every action mattered and every effort contributed to the well-being of the community. As he worked alongside the women, the cowboy reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the desert, the injuries, the fear, and the despair that had seemed insurmountable. But he also remembered the moment he first encountered the women, their courage, their kindness, and their willingness to save him without hesitation. It was a moment that had changed everything, a moment that had introduced him to a life far richer and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Over time, the cowboy and the women developed a deep understanding of one another. They shared stories, taught each other skills, and laughed together over small mistakes and successes. One woman had a gentle way of comforting him when he felt uncertain. Another shared her wisdom, guiding him through difficult decisions. The third inspired him with her bravery and determination. Each had become an essential part of his life, and he had become an essential part of theirs. Together, they had built a relationship based on trust, respect, and shared responsibility, a bond that was strengthened by daily life, challenges, and joy. One afternoon, the elder called them together to perform a ceremony honoring life, survival, and unity. The cowboy, who had once feared the sacred mandate, now approached it with reverence. He listened as the elder spoke of the interconnectedness of all beings, the importance of courage and compassion, and the sacredness of bonds formed through care and trust. The women stood beside him, their hands brushing his gently, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey that had brought them here. For the cowboy, it was a moment of clarity. He was no longer merely a survivor. He was a member of a community, part of a family, and connected to the land in ways that transcended words. As the ceremony progressed, the cowboy felt a profound sense of peace. He realized that the sacred mandate had not been a burden, but a gift. It had guided him to this moment of harmony, showing him the importance of love, respect, and responsibility. He understood that his life had been transformed not only by the women's care, but by the choices he had made, choices to trust, to learn, to grow, and to embrace a life far beyond survival. Life in the village continued with its natural rhythm. The cowboy rose with the sun, worked alongside the women, and contributed to the well-being of the community. Together, they faced challenges, the occasional storm, the need to protect the village from wild animals, and the constant care required to maintain their homes and gardens. Yet each challenge became an opportunity to grow stronger, to deepen their bond, and to live in harmony with one another and the land. The cowboy found joy in the simplicity and purpose of each day, realizing that this life, though challenging, was deeply fulfilling. The bond between the cowboy and the women grew in subtle but profound ways. He learned to anticipate their needs, to support them without being asked, and to share the burdens of daily life. They, in turn, continued to guide, teach, and inspire him. Their relationship was no longer defined solely by gratitude or obligation, but by mutual respect, trust, and a deep, abiding affection. The cowboy understood that love in this context was both an action and a feeling, a commitment to care, protect, and grow together through life's challenges and joys. In quiet moments, the cowboy often reflected on his journey. He remembered the pain, fear, and uncertainty of his past life, and contrasted it with the warmth, safety, and purpose he now felt. The women had taught him that strength was not measured by solitude or independence, but by the ability to connect, to care, and to contribute to the lives of others. Through their guidance, he had discovered a sense of belonging, a family, and a life rich with meaning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the canyon walls and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, the cowboy sat with the women by a fire. They shared a simple meal, laughing and talking about the day's events. One woman spoke of a story from her childhood, another shared a song taught by her mother, and the third offered gentle advice on a task he had struggled with earlier. The cowboy listened intently, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He realized that these women had become his teachers, his friends, and his partners in life, guiding him through challenges and sharing in the joys of everyday existence. As the night deepened, the cowboy and the women looked up at the stars. The vast desert stretched beyond the canyon, silent and majestic. In that quiet moment, he felt a profound connection to the land, to the women, and to the life they had built together. He understood that the sacred mandate had not only saved him physically, but had given him a chance to grow spiritually and emotionally. It had taught him the value of trust, courage, and love, and had introduced him to a life of harmony and purpose. The days continued, each filled with meaningful work, shared laughter, and quiet reflection. The cowboy learned to hunt, gather, and care for the animals, always mindful of the lessons the women had taught him about balance and respect. He became an integral part of the community, contributing not only his strength but also his insight, compassion, and loyalty. Through his actions, he honored the sacred mandate, proving that the bond he shared with the women was not only spiritual but practical, a living, breathing connection that shaped every aspect of their lives. As seasons changed, the cowboy and the women faced new challenges. A harsh winter brought cold winds and heavy snow, requiring them to work tirelessly to keep the village warm and safe. Together, they built fire breaks, gathered food, and maintained the shelters. The cowboy realized that these trials, though difficult, strengthened their bond and taught him lessons he could not have learned anywhere else. He had become resilient, patient, and deeply committed, not only to the women but to the community that had embraced him as one of their own. Through these shared experiences, love grew quietly but steadily. It was not a loud or dramatic declaration, but a steady, enduring feeling built on trust, respect, and mutual support. The cowboy learned to read the women's expressions, understand their moods, and anticipate their needs. They, in turn, responded with care, guidance, and affection. Together, they had created a life of balance, harmony, and shared purpose, a life that celebrated survival, courage, and the beauty of connection. One spring morning, the cowboy and the women gathered by the river to celebrate the renewal of life. Flowers bloomed along the banks, birds sang overhead, and the water sparkled in the sunlight. They performed a small ceremony, honoring the land, the spirits, and the bond that had brought them together. The cowboy felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. He understood that his journey, from the lonely desert, through fear and injury, to this place of love and purpose, had been guided by fate, courage, and the unwavering kindness of the women who had saved him. By the time summer arrived, the cowboy had fully integrated into village life. He worked, laughed, and celebrated alongside the women, participating in every aspect of their daily routine. He had become a source of support, protection, and companionship, and the bond they shared had grown into something sacred and enduring. The sacred mandate, which had once seemed daunting, was now a living reality, a relationship based on love, trust, respect, and shared purpose. The women, too, had grown close to the cowboy in ways that transcended friendship. They saw his courage, his dedication, and his willingness to learn and adapt. They admired his resilience, his patience, and the way he had embraced their traditions and way of life. Together, they had faced challenges, celebrated successes, and built a life that was both practical and deeply spiritual. Their bond was a testament to the power of trust, compassion, and shared experience. As the story of the cowboy and the three women spread quietly through the canyon, it became a source of inspiration for others in the village. They saw that courage and compassion could transform lives, that love could grow from trust and shared responsibility, and that a life once filled with fear and uncertainty could become one of meaning, harmony, and fulfillment. The cowboy, once alone in the desert, had found a home, a family, and a purpose that would guide him for the rest of his life. In the end, the cowboy understood that his journey had been about more than survival. It had been about learning to trust, to love, and to embrace a life filled with meaning and connection. The sacred mandate had led him to the women who saved him, and through their guidance, patience, and care, he had discovered the true essence of courage, loyalty, and love. Together they lived in harmony with one another, the community, and the land, their lives intertwined in a way that was sacred, enduring, and profoundly beautiful. As night fell over the canyon, the cowboy sat with the women by the fire, watching the stars shimmer above. The cool desert breeze carried the scent of sage and earth. He felt peace, gratitude, and a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey that had begun with fear, injury, and isolation had led him to courage, trust, and love. He understood that life at its best was not measured by wealth or freedom, but by connection, respect, and the courage to embrace the bonds that shape our lives. And in that quiet, starlit moment, he knew that he had found his true home, one built on courage, compassion, and the enduring love of three remarkable women.